My parents divorced when I was pretty young. I was 4, turning 5.
Okay.
So I grew up, I mean, they were remarried by the time I was 7. So I really grew up with 4 parents, essentially. Not only did I have like a good example of how, co-parenting can work and separation can work, but because of that, I never grew up with like fighting in the household. So I only have like happy memories of like
Sure.
parents getting along and now that I know, as an adult, knowing your parents as adults who had children, I don't know how my parents were ever together. So my parents divorced when I was pretty young. I was 4, turning 5.
Okay.
So I grew up, I mean, they were remarried by the time I was 7. So I really grew up with 4 parents, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wait, they got remarried to other people.
Yes, sorry, remarried, new marriages, but they were all very active in my life by the time I was 7. So it was
Okay.
always, if we had a big family event or I'd say like a graduation, all my parents were there. So I was really lucky. The divorce was amicable. It was really respectful, which I know is rare. So
Sure.
yeah, I was very lucky for that. And all my parents were involved all throughout my childhood. So, and it was just myself and my sister with 4 parents. So it was an interesting dynamic for sure.
I can imagine. Wait, an older or younger sister?
Older sister by age, and I don't say this to, she's not gonna kill me for saying this, but I have kind of taken on the older sister role in our
Okay.
family. Even my parents, my cousins, my aunties, they would all say the same thing. Like,
Yeah.
I'm kind of my sister's keeper. I've always been the caretaker.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But and I do think that is an interesting dynamic, like you said. We don't always see when families separate or they split up in that way that they're able to not necessarily just reconcile, because that in and of itself, can take a long time.
Right.
But to then get remarried and decide that we're all going to come together and kind of work as one big family unit, essentially.
Yeah, it was really bizarre, especially because my parents separated when they were fairly young. Like, they were 28 to 29 and had 2 kids. And so I feel like they also didn't have a lot of support from their family, so they were kind of doing everything on their own.
Yeah.
So I think it's crazy that they were able to navigate like having weekly calls with each other to say, hey, how are the kids doing in school? Things that they were doing that I feel like are now becoming more common, and like,
Yeah.
this is the best way to co-parent. But back in the day, like, I don't know, I feel like that wasn't a normal system.
I mean, I think that that's awesome, though, that you get to benefit from that unique experience. It's kind of like, that for anybody who would be going or the product of a divorced home, it's going to be inherently challenging for a lot of people, right?
Right.
But in your case, you're saying at the same time, they very quickly were able to not only get into a new relationship and a new marriage, but then decide that they want to effectively co-parent together. So like you said, instead of just 2 parents, you actually had 4.
Yeah, bonus parents. And it was crazy because not only did I have like a good example of how, co-parenting can work and separation can work, but because of that, I never grew up with like fighting in the household. So I only have like happy memories of like
Sure.
parents getting along and now that I know, as an adult, knowing your parents as adults who had children, I don't know how my parents were ever together. Like, I cannot imagine them being in a relationship and getting along. So for me, it's like, wow, this was the best case scenario. I feel like I really came out on top of everything.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think even just being able to be surrounded by that level of support.
Right.
And seeing that even though things maybe don't go according to plan or however we maybe envision it in our mind,
Right.
there's still a way for us to make this work, and especially be for the betterment of the children.
Yeah.
Meaning you and your older sister.
Yeah. And the fact that when they remarried, those step parents are still in my life today. So, I mean, my mom and my father were together for 12 years, which was significant, right? It
Yeah.
wasn't a short amount of time. And now my mom with her current husband, my second dad, they've been together 20 years now or something. So, and my dad and my stepmom are coming up close on that as well. So it was kind of seeing 2 long-term significant relationships that all of my parents speak about so positively.
Wow.
Yeah. It's
No,
bizarre.
I think that that's a blessing, because I think
Yeah.
you don't always get to see that. And
No.
and again, the purpose of discussing and trying to lay the foundation of the family is because that shapes, for the vast majority of us, how we see ourselves and sort of what we expect, when we get older. So if you're seeing a lot of that healthier dynamic between folks, even when things don't go according to plan,
Exactly.
I think that sets a really good tone for you and your sister. I don't know if you would agree with that.
Completely agree. Yeah. And my mom has always said that, you know, my dad was the perfect person for her in that stage of her life. And as they were growing and kind of turning into their adult selves, they grew apart. And now my stepdad was the perfect person for her in this stage of her life. And I don't think that's normal to talk about it that way, especially from parents. And so for me, I even see my past relationships as being really healthy and beneficial for that stage of my life, and that they were still successful relationships. My mom, you know, speaks of her marriage with my father as it having been a really successful, beneficial relationship. And I think we have this idea of like successful is that it would still be lasting, right? Like if it was successful, you'd still be together. And I don't necessarily share that same frame of mind because of that.
Okay. No, and I think that's a very intriguing way to think about it too, right?
Yeah.
So it didn't go according to plan in terms of I thought we would have longevity until like, you know, somebody passes away.
Right.
But I've extracted so much maybe positive value and I've learned and I've grown as an individual, hopefully you have as well, that I would rank this a successful relationship, regardless of the fact that we are not going to continue in life together.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that that's a beautiful reframe that we probably need to think about more often. Because, I think a lot of us, that's sort of the expectation, regardless of whatever type of relationship it is.
Right.
I think we're supposed to stay together as long as we physically can.
Exactly.
But if we're okay with understanding that it might not go all the way, it might not go the distance, but what was I able to maybe learn about myself, learn about the other person? How do I treat one another, looking outside of myself? These are things that we talk about a lot on this platform. Because relationships are inherently complicated, because humans are inherently complicated. And I love having the opportunity to like talk these things through, because even like what you just did, you brought a very refreshing perspective that a lot of us don't have the fortune of living through.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I agree. And I do, you know, a lot of my friends, their parents are separated. And even I would say my friends whose parents are not separated probably have the most complicated relationships. And my friends who their parents are separated, a lot of them say the same thing, to where they don't know how their parents are ever together. Like, it's probably for the best that they separated, but I don't think they have the same perspective on it as I do. And the perspective that I have is because of my parents. They really framed it that way. I would not have had this perspective on my own. It was really them preaching it through growing up, that you got bonus parents. I mean, one of the first things my mom said was 2 Christmases. And that was huge as a kid. You know, I was like, oh, double the gifts, double the love. And that's how they just phrased everything. So
I like that phrase, bonus parents.
Yeah.
It's like a video game reference. No, but that does make sense though. I mean, I agree with you. I think, for those that don't know, I don't know if I told you, but I'm also a father. My son's about to be 12 years old. So I think about that too. Like the things that you put out there as normal, right? And these are things that we say and we also just do. And you all, and we all as children, we're just observing and kind of taking it all in. If I present these situations and these experiences to you, and it's just like, hey, this is kind of how it is, then you don't know any difference. You don't have anything to compare it to. So you're like, oh, okay, that's awesome. I guess I do get 2 sets of parents, and I'm just going to roll with that. Double the love.
Right.
And I think that is a really cool way to look at it, and not look at it as in we just failed at this, so now we're both going to live these separate lives irrespective of each other, when we both made these kids. So like our spouses inadvertently are and probably should be involved in their lives to some degree.
Yeah.
Right. But it sounds like they did all that talking about beforehand maybe, and they decided like, yes, we're going to cooperatively do this together.
Yeah. And I think a big piece of that, and I will say, I think my sister and I had different experiences because I was younger. So she might have a slightly different perspective because she probably did hear some fighting, right, that I didn't hear at my age or remember. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
It's okay. I was actually going to mention that I think for a lot of people, and I try to talk about this on this show, when we talk about co-parenting, the idea that, to your point, sometimes situations aren't going to work out where we're going to stay together. Like, for example, I co-parent. Right. And so what I always want the focus to be is the child or children, depending on how many you have. Because at the end of the day, like, we chose to make them, and they didn't ask to be here, and they don't know all the stuff that we got going on. So it is in their best interest to make sure we can find a coherent way to work together, right? For the sake of them. We want to project positivity, encouragement, love, compassion, understanding. And essentially, once you remove like the emotional aspect of it, it is easier to work together. I understand for some folks that
Very
takes
hard,
longer.
yeah.
I'm not trying to make it sound like that's easy,
Right.
because I understand that it's not. But I do think it's important for us to put in that effort, because at the end of it, I would rather children speak about it in the way that you just did, as opposed to, man, all I remember was screaming and yelling and arguing and fighting. And now that's become so normalized to me that I'm not necessarily seeking it out, but I'm not seeing that as concerning behaviors when I'm in my own relationships, if you get what I mean.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, they were the adults in the situation, right? And we
Right.
were the children. And so taking that responsibility. And the other thing I was going to say that I had slipped my mind was also my family, our extended family, we don't have close relationships with. And so I think that was another reason for my parents to really double down on, no, we're going to keep this unit a unit because we're all we have. We're kind of all these girls have. And so there was that extra layer of pressure to just make it work.
Absolutely. And I think that, and for some people that is true. Like you might not have an extended family that you really associate with.
Right.
And then maybe it is just the immediate family. So you need to make the best of, what you have.
Yeah.
But regardless, to me, the best thing I heard you say about that is the willingness to collaborate and cooperate.
Exactly.
That's the idea and the message that I try to talk about, particularly when it comes to parenting. Because a lot of people, as I'm sure you know, are having children and, they don't necessarily work out, which I don't think is right or wrong.
Right.
But you have to be willing to put your personal feelings to the side. When you have a little person there,
Yeah.
you have to. You got to find a way. I understand it is difficult,
Yeah.
but it's got to be done.
Yeah.
That's my little PSA. I will get off my soapbox now.